Welcome to episode 6 of the Paragon Sounds podcast. In this episode, I'm joined by the very knowledgeable and overall nice guy, Scott Draeger, who's the Vice President of Customer Transformation over in the US for leading CCM provider Quadient. We delve into learning how the overall customer experience has changed since the start of the global pandemic and how some businesses who were slow to react to the innovative change due to their fears of cost over risk have now possibly damaged their end customer experience. For all the information covered in today's episode, please visit www.paragon-cc.com/Paragon Sounds. Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode 6 of the Paragon Sounds podcast. I'm your host, John Chappell from Paragon, and with me today we have Scott Draeger, who is the Vice President of Customer Transformation at Quadient. Scott, thank you very much for joining on the line.
Oh, thanks, John. Excited to be part of the Paragon Sounds podcast.
Great. Well, thanks so much for joining. And you're on the line with us from sunny Chicago. Was it sunny or rainy?
Excited to. Hey, depends on the day. It's rainy today.
It's rainy today, so a nice rainy day in Chicago. But we've got Scott on to this podcast because Scott's ability, his market knowledge of everything around CCM, especially with his role within Quadient. We're exploring a content piece around, is it time to innovate legacy? So the idea around this story is, are brands quick to judge when it comes to the innovation towards improving their CCM platforms? What hurdles are putting them at bay at doing it? Or what businesses and what industries are well ahead of their competitors and are performing fantastically when it comes to innovating their CCM systems? Are they low? Are they slow? And what the drivers are? And basically, are they ready to go forward? So we brought Scott on, and I'm sure we're going to get some great stuff out of this conversation today. And ultimately, Scott, what would be great before we start, would you mind sort of introducing yourself and telling everyone what you do at Quadient?
I have about 20 years in the CCM experience, starting from the service provider side, where I started with marketing communications, hospital billing applications, hotel rewards applications. Then I moved over into the software side, spending some time traveling the United States, working at different service providers to make sure that incredible projects with short deadlines got turned around quickly and looked nice. Then I moved over to software and really just tried to take some of those lessons I learned from the service provider days to make things easier and better. Because I noticed when a lot of companies work with their service provider, there's a lot of extra conversations. And we tried to make software that facilitates those conversations to make it as easy as possible for both the customer and the service provider, so that you can communicate better and more efficiently.
So I'm going to jump in here straight away, Scott, and I'm really keen to see, and I hate to bring up this word, but I think COVID-19, this pandemic that everyone is involved in at this current time, and you know, how are you sort of seeing markets handling sort of innovation and transformational change now, post, dare I say, or current COVID-19? What have you seen today? What are people sort of experiencing from this?
There's a few different types of people and a few different types of reactions. The kind of the blessing and the curse of COVID-19, the curse is that everything was disrupted. Many of us had to work from home. Many of our addresses changed. So the post box that you counted on to receive payments or send payments may have been located differently. All the systems had to be updated so that people could access them remotely. Maybe some of them weren't designed to be as remote as they were. Mm-hmm. So the big thing right now is you have understood all of the cracks in your organization, and you've had a chance in 2020 to see everything that was broken. And now it's a time where people are saying, okay, we're going to prepare for 2021, but am I going to just assume I made it through a bad patch and everything's fine, I'll just keep the same system? Or am I going to redesign how my business works so that if this happens again, I won't notice, or I'm much more nimble in that regard?
Do you think businesses now with the home worker Are they ready sort of for the influx of home working and sort of consumer digestion habits with that?
Well, they're having trouble with collaboration.
Yeah.
If you have a normal process that creates a communication, like something that typically you would send out to Paragon, before you send it out, usually you have 4 or 5 people in a meeting room,
Yeah.
and you figure out what you're going to send out, what the message needs to look like, all the information, the basic information you need before you go send it over to Paragon. You have to get on the same page about what you're communicating with, and that's very difficult right now. Paragon's doing a great job of bringing those together when you do send things, but it still means you have to do some collaboration on your side, and that's one of the things that work from home is a little frustrating for many people.
Of course, of course. Do you see with this, this change that they have to react quickly, do you see sort of some business leaders' egos are slightly bruised by this? Is it highlighting certain insecurities with certain people to put them on high alert, where they have to feel like, oh, blimey, this has happened. We're sort of seeing gaps in things that aren't working. Are you seeing that more and more from a sort of a top level part of business leaders?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So, John, we're seeing that for sure. And it's not people's fault that this happened. But, a lot of especially the enterprise systems, an enterprise system who's been doing it internally in-house, a lot of times they were able to say, no, I need, 2 months or 90 days or 6 months to make a change, because over the years they have grew into a very complicated system. So it takes a long time to make a simple change, because the simple change has a ripple effect across potentially hundreds of thousands or millions of lines of code by this time if it's 20 years old.
Yeah.
And you don't have that time. You don't have that luxury of that kind of time these days. And this isn't customer pressure, and this is one of the things that's great about what I watch, like Paragon and some of our other service providers that I've worked at in the past. There's an incredible speed within the organization, and they turn around complex items quickly because that's what you focus on.
Yeah.
There is a big difference between how somebody thinks they can implement items and then how COVID told you could. For example, regulations. Regulations used to change. Like, how many years did you get for GDPR warning? Basically, you got 1.5 years, 2 years to get everything ready for GDPR, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, we've all seen that as marketing people. The rules on that were another level, weren't they? So.
Yeah, and we were all, and before this podcast continues, you need to accept these cookies and conform to. We're going to stop and make you click 9 buttons now. But we all got through the GDPR. But we had about 1.5 years, 2 years. I know everybody's working on, potentially regulation changes that would be, you would follow on from some of the Brexit items.
Yeah.
We're going to have some warning on that. But with COVID, now I spent most of my time, as you can tell from my Chicago accent, in the U.S., but I have traveled a fair bit. But in the U.S., most of my experience is over here. We were watching the healthcare insurers, the healthcare payers. They started to get a tighter time to make changes because the healthcare communications were some of the most complicated here in this market.
Right.
And usually you had about 6 months warning. You started sending out information to get people to sign up for insurance October, November, and then January 1st was your day everything went live and all communications hit. So you had a good, but then famously our Congress and our legislative and executive branches would fight, and that time came down to you just had a few weeks to make major changes. So the healthcare industry went from about 6 months to change time to down to about 8 weeks.
Wow. Yeah.
But now with COVID, you've had major regulatory changes that took place in a course. The regulatory changes played out in a course of 2 weeks with compliance periods that were instantaneous.
To be as reactive as anything, isn't it? You've got to just jump on it as quick as it can.
Yeah, and the systems weren't built to do that.
No.
And it's really the people collaboration. One of the things to think about as you make communications is imagine your CEO change tomorrow.
Okay.
You didn't know.
Yeah.
Nobody knew. It was a surprise. The CEO, she decided she was going to do something new and just, left on a whim. How long would it take for you to change every reference of the CEO's name in every communication you send?
Well, an old, slow, sluggish system would take quite a while, wouldn't it? So,
Oh, yeah.
yeah, absolutely.
If you kind of break up content and have a real centralized view of how you communicate with customers, you would have that signature in just a few places, and it would be much easier to change. But when, especially in-house operations, when they need a new letter, they're afraid they're going to, break something in the existing system. So a lot of times they just copy paste an old one. But now when that needs to change, now they have to change two.
Mm-hmm.
Two's easy, five's easy. But we were working with a customer who had been doing this for 20 years, and they had nearly 30,000 letters.
Wow. All templated.
Yeah, all
That way.
templated. And it was because people were afraid to touch the original system. Nobody wants to break something because you'll get in trouble for that. So as a result, being defensive one letter at a time wound up creating a very slow to change customer communication strategy, which negatively impacts your customer experience.
But taking on to that, so what are the key sort of customer strategies organizations are sort of now using when implementing these type of legacy migration projects towards replacing out the old and in with the new? Sort of what kind of strategies have you seen, and what have you sort of worked with clients on to do that?
Well, I'm going to start with one that really irritates me.
Best one.
It's fairly common, and that's it's fairly common, but it's also near and dear to my heart because it's the customer experience focused one. I'm a certified customer experience professional through the CXPA, so spent a little bit of time studying this. But people who are trying to improve communications, they look and they say, "Oh, okay, I'm going to fix the easy ones, or I'm going to fix the digital ones." So usually you'll get somebody who jumps in the organization. They're new. We always joke that if you want to find the customer experience person in America, the person dresses like they're British, and if you want to find them in the UK, you're going to see somebody who looks American. That's how you point them out.
That's a stereotype. That's the CX stereotype. I love that.
Yeah, look a little bit, slightly quirky and a little bit different, which is kind of fun. But these people, they kind of set in and they're like, "Oh, okay, I want to make a big impact." And just like everyone else, this is not disparaging of these folks. They want to make a big impact, and they're going to make a big impact on the dashboard they look at. And the dashboard they look at most readily displays, web, social, and mobile type statistics.
Yeah, because that's where you assume where everyone is and where they're looking, isn't it?
Yeah, and it's not everyone.
No.
So what they do is they spend time fixing those, improving the customer experience. Maybe they start asking some questions about the call center, but they almost never make it down to some of the print. And that's a problem because most of the important experiences wind up in the print shop. So we call this one sign and decline.
Sign and decline. Okay.
So once somebody signs the contract, their experience declines right away. Because they say, "Oh, okay, this is going to go to the contract, and the contract, we were told to save money, so we're going to make that 3 columns of text in a 9-point font." And you felt important when you were on the mobile and social and web portal.
Yeah.
But now you have a different experience, and that negatively impacts the customer experience. So when somebody thinks they're doing a great job with customer experience, but they don't understand the full range of channels, and that the journey will continue beyond that communication, they miss some key communications.
And that tangible offering is always going to be that important part of any type of customer journey, isn't it? People will react differently, they'll engage a bit better, and that's always the important thing. And like you said, people will forget at times to look at those fundamental pieces, that legacy, that original type of comms.
Yeah, and that's where understanding and thinking about customer journeys, and that's one of the things that we were trying to advocate for about 5 years now, is understanding what happens to this communication. Just simply asking a few questions: what happens before and what happens next, and that stops some of the commodity thinking. I know Paragon over the years has done a great job improving the design value, the multi-channel, the end-to-end customer journey, but a lot of folks still think about commodities. They think, oh, I'm going to do this program and I'm going to look at a cost per piece, and they don't ask a few questions. But what I like about when I talk to folks from Paragon, it's, hey, where does this fit in? We want to make sure we help the customers more, and ask simple questions of, okay, what happens before they receive this
Yeah.
on a project meeting, and then what's going to happen after, and then what happens. It's kind of that you know that fishbone diagram thinking of what happens before, what's the cause of this one, and then all of a sudden you understand that this thing you're working on, you thought was a small project, is part of an important customer journey, and if you don't understand it, you will potentially let the customer down, so you will
Yeah.
never save money
No.
if you just think about it as 1,000 projects and not
Yeah.
one customer that follows journeys.
Oh, I do. What kind of internal hurdles or sort of key drivers do you think organizations face when approaching the idea of change?
I think it's almost always internal
Yeah.
and about departmental silos. There are two major sources of, I'll just oversimplify it for the sake of a podcast. Um, there's two real budgets. There's sales and marketing and operations. There are customer communications that fall into both categories,
Yes.
but they're not paid for by both categories. That's the moment, that sign and decline moment, that I always focus on.
Yeah.
Because the sales and marketing, they can walk up to the CEO's office and say, hey, if you give me uh, 200,000 pounds, I can generate this many new customers. That's a project that could get approved with a pretty quick discussion. After you have that, and let's say that project was incredibly successful and it brought on 100,000 new customers. Well, the operations budget just received more cost, but if they walk up to the CEO's office and they say, well, I need some more cost to communicate with these customers, they're going to say, your operations, I tell you to do more with less every year. Sales and marketing is told to do more with more. Operations is told to do more with less. And that's usually how the budgets go. And that determines the quality of the customer experience over the customer life cycle. So
Yeah.
that's the biggest barrier.
So they come in big with sales and marketing. They come in flamboyant. They come in with a great experience that we should technically onboard them. And then there you're saying there where the operational team who are triaging and maintaining and nurturing that relationship over a period set amount will struggle at times to keep that consistent communication they had at the beginning consistent. I think that's where we're sort of seeing the sort of changes with those operational silos, isn't it? They're not consistent enough, and they're not on the same wavelength in that sense.
Yeah, it's like the sea level tries to keep these people locked in the dungeon, because if they come out of the dungeon, they'll ask for money. It's like, no, keep them in the dungeon, because as soon as they come out, they're going to ask for money. They'll be right, and we'll feel bad. So let's just keep them in the dungeon. Or that's kind of a facetious description, but how it actually plays out is the phase inside your business that's causing you to do this right now is, let's put that off till next year.
Yeah,
it's easy to say.
It is until things like the pandemic rears its ugly head and causes complete cracks in every type of infrastructure you have. And then when you go, oh, we divert that to next year, we should have done that last year or the year before, it's kind of shot yourself in the foot, haven't you?
Yeah, I've seen people who have deferred something to next year. In one very very outlier case, early in my career, I worked someplace and they were working on a project, and I definitely don't want to name this one. They said that within 3 years, this was in 1999, they said, within 3 years, we're gonna get off the mainframe entirely. It's still on. It was supposed to be 3 years, and there's a few projects. Almost everything's gone, but not everything is gone. And that's kind of some of the thinking of, oh, we can do that next year. And your bias to action is slow if the system is working.
Yeah.
Which is the other phrase you see. And the other phrase is very American phrase, so I apologize for this one. But if it ain't broke, don't fix it.
Oh, we say that here in the UK too. Yeah. Don't worry. Yeah, absolutely.
Probably sounds cooler when you say it.
Yeah, absolutely. If it's not causing them issues at that time, yeah, like you said, let's defer it a year. And then from that example you just said, let's defer it for another 20 years. And hopefully it will fix itself and we don't need to rear it. But in the days we're at now, where innovation is key, innovation keeps companies alive. And if they don't innovate, they will initially die over time, quick or long. It's important to look at that, isn't it? And I've got here written on my notes, and I think this is from our previous discussions, and I've got something here, the cost of risk versus the cost, the high cost. So are people sort of looking at risk more, or are they purely looking at cost function more as an internal driver for change, do you think?
I think the smart ones are looking at risk right now.
Yeah, I bet.
But I think most people are instinctively in their kind of fear state and looking at cost. They should be. The smart ones are looking at risk. Everybody should be looking at risk because, as we talked about a little earlier, you ran into a situation where you found absolutely everything that was broken in the organization. Your employees, nope, not on the same local network. Everybody's scattered. Yeah. Making collaboration difficult, making deployment difficult, making it difficult to get together on the same page because you don't have a whiteboard and sticky notes that you could all kind of point and argue over. And when you are collaborating well, some kids and dogs are in the background. So that's a tough thing that we went through. But the risk that we have to understand is what happened to the change time. So our internal change time means that communication just can't be an afterthought or, oh, this is one person's part-time job. So you have to make sure you have a trusted partner that's helping you with communication that has that short reaction time and actually offers you some of those collaboration tools. Because you want to make sure that you have access to make those changes quickly, and then you don't have to worry about deployment. Because I guarantee when COVID hit, the IT team's first project was to make sure everybody's work from home was working. The second was making sure that all of the privacy stuff was in there, all the GDPR stuff was functioning, all of the extra data that was now exposed by work from home, all of that is under control. That was problem number one. Changing the CEO's signature or adding your nice soothing COVID-19 message package, that was not the top item on IT's list.
No, I bet it isn't. No. How do you sort of see that then? So where we're talking about working with a provider and people's some companies' inabilities towards change, how is this looking towards sort of really regulated markets? Industries like the financial services industry, healthcare, retail, obviously different regulators across the pond compared to us, but these regulators still expect these businesses to provide a certain regulated standard of care to their customers and clients. And with everything that's going around and the ability of change, do you think some regulators are ahead of businesses, dare I say, or do you think some businesses are actually at times ahead of regulators? And do you have any good examples of, how some regulated industries are looking at change?
Oh yeah, there are definitely businesses that are ahead of regulators. Usually it's good that they're ahead, and if they're ahead of regulators and are thinking about customer engagement from a customer experience perspective, they're doing well. Yeah. And what that means is if I'm an enterprise in a regulated industry and I need to send out some communications and I look at the regulators and I say, what is the minimum I have to do? Well, I'll do the minimum. And that's not going to be a great customer experience because the regulators, when they create, sometimes in the United States, we have something called a model communication,
Hmm.
or the regulatory agency puts out something that says, this is a sample of a communication. Well, everybody jumps to that and says, okay, if I design it like this, I will never be in trouble. And, that's true, but it was also designed by somebody in the government who's not a designer, who's just concerned about information content. They're not concerned about customer experience. They're all concerned with making sure that it's regulatory compliant, not whether it's easy to consume, easy to understand.
Yeah.
So if somebody who's CX thinking, they say, "Oh, okay, this is the minimum. This isn't the target. This is the hurdle. I can definitely jump above this hurdle. That's okay. I
Ticking the
just don't
box.
want to knock. Yeah, I
Yeah.
don't want to knock it down. I don't want to just tick the box. I need to tick the box." But that's where we see some of the companies are using extra channels. So they may say, I have a mandate to print this, or I have a mandate to make a PDF available for archive purposes. But also, if it's the web presentation, why aren't I making it sortable? Or why am I not sending an SMS message or an email that says something is on its way if the customer is expecting an insurance policy? Hey, your insurance policy, it's on its way. Legally, we have to send you one, but there's a cooler digital version on the portal right now. So that's kind of the thinking, making sure that regulations are the minimum, not the maximum.
No, they're standard stuff that you have to do to ensure you keep up with the regulatory change, but at the same time, the customer is always at the forefront, isn't it? So that's what you're saying. The CX plan is always that 5 boxes ahead of the initial first box you just ticked for regulatory change. So from a compliance, so if you work in, so I don't know if you've got pearls of wisdom here, Scott. So I think, if you work in compliance, sort of a governance role within an organization, a regulated organization, for example, and you need to, how do you, senior decision makers within your business, sort of more peace of mind to ensure you cover all points for pains and requests from regulators to clients? Do you think governance and risk should work closely with CX? Governance and risk maybe should work closely with marketing or operational side? Do you think it should just be one big ecosystem where everyone sort of contributes into one pot?
I think it needs to be more of an ecosystem, but that only works if it's easy to be involved. It's like, what was the phrase? Like, is this free like beer or free like a puppy? If it's a puppy, it's going to be a lot of work, and nobody wants to do customer experience and customer communications if it's a ton of work. No. Everybody's happy to help out when they're doing just a little bit of participation, and that means like applying your expertise. So it needs to have a good system underneath it where people understand how content is shared across different pieces of communication.
Yeah.
How the corporate voice executes across a whole suite and portfolio of customer communications, and how that matches as a customer moves from one organization to the other. Because you have marketing, in a perfect world, a customer moves from a prospect moves from being a stranger to engaging with some marketing. Then they start engaging with sales. They switch from a prospect to a customer. They may go to onboarding, customer care, renewals. That's the kind of typical journey. And that's 4 or 5 different departments. And simple things like approving content. We noticed we developed some AI-based tools to facilitate migration of complex legacy platforms. And one of the things we initially found was most of the letters had pretty much the same closing. So the complimentary closing is, thank you for getting, asking us about service. If you need anything else, call this number on these days or visit this website. Usually there's about 10 versions of that paragraph. All 10 have been approved by legal. All 10 have been reviewed by compliance. But there didn't need to be 10 because now you're managing 10 pieces of content. So a system that's simpler lets somebody just kind of log in, see it, change it, and then put it into production. Say, oh, the website changed, so I just need to change one thing or 2 things instead of hundreds or in some cases thousands of different communications.
Yeah, yeah. And it's that centralized single look of pieces that could just be managed by one piece by multiple teams. And you have that transparency there, don't you? And that takes you out from the earlier points we were talking around businesses working in silos. You don't, departmental silos where they struggle to talk to each other. They struggle to budgetary sort of handle things and sort of understanding the general CX. Obviously, the more slicker businesses these days have that overarching CX and the sort of the customer journey mapping place overlapping a bit all, but it's trying to get everyone working together to really define that experience for the customer. Now, this takes me into the next section of this discussion, because like you were saying earlier, of your experience in CX, and I'm really sort of want to delve into sort of the end user now and see our brands now sort of listening to their customers more since this pandemic started. Did they not before, or did they currently were doing it at the same time? And do businesses really need to start looking at customer journey mapping? So once all this craziness has finished and the world is, as we can see, some parts of the world are coming back to normality, do businesses need to look at it and go, right, what does the customer need? How do we assure they are feeling loved and welcomed and supported by us? Are they doing that? Have you seen that?
I have seen that. It didn't start out necessarily with good intentions. Well, it wasn't bad intentions, but they weren't trying to improve the customer experience when some of these started. I'll take a story of a bank in the U.S. So that nobody in the UK feels bad.
Okay.
There's a bank that specializes in retail auto loans. It was difficult when all of their employees in the call center, so they had pretty good sized call center. So now all those people went outside, and then there was that was tough enough. Then there was a regulatory change. So all customers in the auto finance market in the United States were offered a 3-month forbearance. So that meant that most customers called. So while the call center was scattered and doing this from their kitchens and living rooms of the United States, well, the call volume went up by a factor of 3 to 5. Wow. And not only that, the regulators changed that rule, so all the communications had to change. So in less than a week, all the call center went to scattered, all the content had to be written, and the calls came in at an incredible spike. So we're watching this kind of system creates the need for rapidly changing and rapidly deployed customer experience updates. So whether you need a redesign, you need to get it done quickly. And that happened to be one of our customers. So they were using these tools to help them do it quickly. They just realized that these 2 weeks were very difficult for them. Very difficult 2 weeks is a much better situation than I couldn't get it done, or I had to throw things away and get out the duct tape and make a bunch of temporary new systems and really just try to go to survival mode. These people, they had the tools, they had the technology, and they thought about the customer. So they did a much better job. They did those journeys, and other places, as soon as this happened, they broke out their customer journey mapping capabilities. We have a customer journey mapping. We were the first in the CCM industry to create customer journey mapping. Now 4 people have copied us. Not as yet. We still had a 4-year lead on them. But the interesting thing is, during COVID, we track, that's a cloud utility, so it was very easy for us to track metrics. That one went up by a factor of more than 15. So the amount of journey maps that were created, accessed, and looked at in March and April were 15 times the normal volume. And that's because people were saying, uh-oh, what's happening? Calling the call center, they're having questions. If they have a question, what does that mean? And then they were able to put that change into the communication so that it stopped a 10 or a 20-pound call from hitting the call center later. The customer was calmer, you got the better customer experience, you weren't freaking people out unnecessarily, and you were in control. Basically, understanding the journeys that your customers are on, and there's a lot of different journeys. They're not all positive, and they're not all going to lead to a great customer experience.
No.
You didn't pay your gas bill, we're going to shut it off is not a great journey.
No,
but
it's not
it
at all.
needs to be
No.
done.
Absolutely, it needs to be done in a way that reflects that tone of voice. And obviously, then there's talks of vulnerability, isn't there? How brands are talking to vulnerable clients in this current time. And I think the CX is extremely, and the customer mapping is important. And you need a separate stream of ideas of how you understand and how you communicate with vulnerable clients and customers. And this takes you back to the point you made earlier, where it's all about being in control, isn't it? And having that control and that understanding of what the client needs so you can implement X to achieve Y.
Yeah, that's where just understanding all of the communications is very important. So understanding how somebody flows through, a micro journey, or even your giant journeys that have all of your communications on there. But your micro maps, like, a customer didn't receive something on time, they're going to call the call center. Well, that's a journey. Another thing that's important to look at is if you understand those journeys and you understand the portfolio of communications that you send and how that supports your customer experience strategy, you can create communications that do a good job, but they're also multi-purpose. You can also reduce some of the collateral damage later of excess call center confusion calls. I signed up here. There was a very famous example in the United States of a it's not a Quadient customer at all, not a Paragon customer. It's a telecom that had a very terrible spot in their customer journey.
Right.
They sold bundles of multiple products, cable, internet, cable television, internet, wireless, landline services, and you could sign up for a bundle, but they were still giving you 3 bills. And then the first bill, like if you signed up and they told you this was going to be $99 a month, your first bill came and it was something like $150 or $175.
Because it's separated across free communications.
Yeah, or their system, your start date wasn't the same as the system start date, so your bill was a month plus whatever remainder period you also had. And their system, they refused to fix that system, so they spent a ton of money on marketing saying, hey, your new customer is $99 a month, but your first bill is going to be something more because it's more than 30 days. So they had to get out and proactively market that the first bill was going to seem like it was going to make you angry. and they knew this. Yeah, they knew this.
This marketing campaign that they're doing to manage expectations, I would say, compared to making those simple back-end amends, must have been a lot greater ongoing as well. Yeah.
And it was a good offer. I mean, I'm not complaining about the offer. The $99 offer was a good offer, but it was a terrible handoff between sales, marketing, and operations. Because sales and marketing should have said, what happens if we make this offer?
Yeah.
That's the discussions you should be having internal to the organization. When you're talking to, your provider, you're talking to Paragon and you're saying, hey, I need to get this bill done. You're going to get those kind of questions. You're going to get, hey, what happens next? Why? Where is this on the journey? When you start looking at some of the usage statistics, because one of the things that's great about when you work with a service provider is you'll get a bill that shows some usage stats. And you're going to find out that you're using more of some types of communications than you thought.
Yeah.
And that's a place where you can improve the business. So using, by deciding to send some of your communications out to a provider, you're actually getting back metrics that you would not have captured on your own. And that's simple in the billing. It's like, oh, letter, this strange letter, you're expecting 100 of those. Why was there 10,000 of those this month?
Yeah. So transparent MI there is quite an important thing for them, isn't it?
Yeah. Another one that we look at from a customer perspective is customers are asking channels. Something that I remember I was absolutely horrified. Yeah, I'll be honest. I've done product management for quite a bit of time, and we had a suggestion a few years ago that horrified me, and now I think it's great.
Yeah.
And that was customers wanted to receive a message confirmation. Our customers wanted to send WhatsApp and WeChat confirmations of payments, and I just thought that was it was a place where I thought it was a little bit scary at the time. This was a few years ago. Um, but ultimately, everybody was right, and now we're helping people send that extra confirmation. So customers expect different messages from different channels, but they also want all the channels. So it's like, hey, when you send me a text that my bill was due or you pulled it from my account, that's great. But if you send me an email, it can be a little wordier.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
If you send me print, that's fine. Like put a couple extra offers on the page because you got a full A4 page. You didn't pay less to the Royal Mail because it was only 100 words on it.
Yeah, absolutely. A price of a stamp is the price of a stamp, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's that preference choice, isn't it? And like you said, it's not just some people want, I just want all my stuff digital, but like you said, you got to have that full suite of communication output to really sort of drone that message back and be ready for that client, because the client I take it, will always change on a daily basis. Preferences and technology will be a key driver towards that.
Yeah, and if you're working with if you're getting somebody to help you manage a portfolio of communications, you'll reduce the amount of moving parts, so it's easier. Um, so when you send that message, you're thinking about the message. If you handle this internally, you may have somebody that has to do an approval process, undergo an approval process for the print version, and then somebody has to do a separate approval process for the same message when it goes to the mobile app, the web portal, emails. Now you have a compliance team that has to do 5 or 6 reviews of the same message, not because the message is different, because they have to prove that it's working on each of 5 separate deployment stacks.
Yeah.
That's expensive. The legal team hates that. The legal team hates doing their work 6 times. So if you're working on a system where approval is simplified, the team is willing to participate in the ecosystem more. Because when we were talking a few minutes ago about the ecosystem only works if it's easy. So if you say, okay, we're going to make a strategy where every message is available in 6 channels, your legal and compliance team is just going to shut down. Say,
it's a lot to review, a lot to monitor.
But if you say, we're going to ask you to do this, but we're going to ask you to do it once, legal team says, oh, okay. Then if the marketing team says, I need to change my message quickly, if they look over at the IT team and say, yeah, we've created a line, so that's separate. We don't have to manage that anymore. Great. You can go change those things as many times as you want. That's fine, as long as legal approves it. So now legal can do maybe a third of what they used to approve, but they're supporting documents that change and communications that change at 3 or 4 times the rate, because you're concentrating on a portfolio instead of project.
An ever evolving portfolio, and it's never static, is it? So it'll be one thing, but that will evolve as the customer and the business in the industry evolves itself, won't it?
Yeah, the root cause of change aversion is, kind of back earlier in the conversation, we talked about cost and risk.
Yeah.
Change aversion comes from cost and risk. So if you work to develop a portfolio that's easy to manage and has maximum reusability across the customer lifecycle, you can make large changes at a low risk. But if you have this as, 5,000 separate projects that each have their own channel manifestation, good luck. You're not going to have it's not gonna. You're gonna make a mistake. That's the other thing. Our AI turns up. Like we do a lot of AI communication mining,
Yeah.
and we always find typos. There's a part of the meeting that when we have these workshops, we created a part of a meeting specifically to kind of show the mistakes, and we bring down the stakeholder count in that meeting because it's a little bit embarrassing.
Yeah, I bet. It's tricky.
Yeah, like you said, check your balance instead of check your balance. It's an honest typo, but we were going through this and we saw one of your customers had a relatively large balance, so maybe they might lose confidence if they started to see some typos
Yeah.
in there.
That sets
You
a
get
standard, isn't it?
yeah.
So going back to the AI story there, so I'm keen to sort of see sort of the ideas, the sort of key innovations, trends that you've seen, that you've seen at the start and develop into something new, or what can you see from a trend and CX perspective is going to be over the next horizon for us? What's coming up 2021, 2022? What is my 5-year-old going to look at in 10 years' time? You know, how are people going to digest this? Did you have any sort of things you've seen yourself?
Yeah, there's the customer is going to be more in charge and expect things to change very quickly.
Yeah.
So a customer today might have expectations that I'm going to hear from you every 30 days or once a month when my bill is around, maybe twice the month that you send something. But we're starting to see comparison shopping disrupt that cycle a little bit. So there's been, for a couple years, there have been telcos who have said, you signed a 2-year agreement. We're willing to break that agreement for you. So constant comparison shopping is one of the items that I think is going to put everybody on the customer experience defensive. So you will need to have more communications that say, here's the value you're getting from the service. So it's not just cost, it's experience, it's value, and explaining the service more across
Yeah.
different channels. We're watching some all electronic banks and insurance companies start up. I mean, that was really kind of came out of the UK. That was like some of the original innovators in the all digital insurance companies.
Yeah.
We're starting to see those put pressure on the other companies. They're not going to take everybody's business right away, but they are going to pressure you to communicate better. Personally, I am looking at some of the innovations in AR tech. I don't believe that I'm going to put virtual reality glasses on or some AR glasses that come out in
Yeah.
the next few years and expect my bill to pop up in my face and then I trip over a pothole.
The augmented reality story is there, and I don't think it's going away, but I feel that if you digest it through like a glasses, like a Google Glass, which was popular, then that fell through the floor at one point, didn't it? So, are people digesting their bills through AR, through phone, through tablets? I think, yeah, I don't think people have found that synergy yet of that actual bit of technology that lets them digest it a bit. Like you said, you don't want to be looking at your massive water bill and you're not paying attention and you fall down a pothole, do you? That's kind of a double-edged sword there, isn't it? Yeah.
You bring up something interesting with the utilities, though. There are some proactive utility communication. So look for more chances to engage. So the future is not about less communication. The future is about more. So as you think about how you engage with your customer, it's probably more communications by at least one, if not two orders of magnitude. And it will be one way sometimes, but also two ways. One of the things we talk about here at Quadient is iterative communication. We used to talk a lot about, oh, do you have batch or interactive? And ultimately, a few years ago, both of those meant that the company was going to tell you the customer something. Obviously there were some internal contract development use cases and everything, but ultimately at the end, it was company told customer thing. Customer could take that or leave that. Hopefully it was well designed. Hopefully it performed well for the business. But at the end, it was a one-way, highly tailored and personalized. But now it's starting to be two-way communication. So it's, hey, we're about to take that withdrawal out. Is that still okay? Or and then the customer might say yes or no. We're starting to see some of the chat bots out there.
Yes, chatbot.
One of the
Yeah.
So one of the things we did with our interactive a couple years ago, we explained this to one of the analysts as we were releasing version 12 of Inspire. We said, hey, we did a UI redesign, but you can't see it. And the person was like, what are you talking about? I said, well, we redesigned the UI so that it was easier to integrate RPA technology. Because you take some of those interactions that, if you notice in your call center, we're trending up.
Yeah.
Well, let's take those and do what we can to automate them as much as possible so that it's easier to get an RPA to create a communication. So it's kind of taking, maybe that's some chatbot input that then turns into that communication. Or we have something new where we can follow communications if it bounces. So we'll send you a text message. Oh, you changed providers or changed numbers. It bounces back. Well, then we can say we'll send you the email, and that bounces back. Then we'll send you the print. That should be one design, and that should have a message-based approach. So the future is about more and more communication, not less and less. Just look at the platforms. You went down to Twitter, was 140 characters for a long time. You can't read your full terms and conditions in a tweet. So
no,
it's somebody will crash their car if they try to look at that at a stoplight or something.
You don't even get Alexa to read it to you either, can you? Really?
Yeah. Alexa will go to sleep and get bored.
Yes, she will. Well, you're struggling with life if Alexa gets bored.
Yeah. So that's kind of the think about is you're going to have more channels, more interactions, and these iterative communications are going to take more than one interaction between you and the customer to get done. And that's a way to think about communications. Communications support your experience portfolio. It's not the whole customer experience, but they're a pretty important part. And this is a pretty interesting stat. We were doing some research inside Quadient Company.
Yeah.
Our customers combined send 500 billion communications a year.
Wow. That's
500 billion personalized messages go out with the Quadient technology every year. So we care about how they move through channels.
Takes us. I'm keen to understand. With these amounts of comms going out, we're looking at the customer journey. We talked about, what clients want, what clients need, what we're sort of seeing on the horizon. We also looked at the internal drivers, the hurdles businesses face from a boardroom to a C-level to down to operational. Now, if they jumped onto this innovate change idea and they went, right, we need to do this, or a business they just jumped on and are working through it post-pandemic or current, they're going to want to know, how do they track the return on investment they've had? Does it work? Have they saved money? And it's not just the return on investment from cost, it's also the return on investment in customer life cycles and customer retention and acquisition. So, what kind of ROIs do you think are industry leaders looking at after implementing a transformational change project?
Well, industry leaders that are looking at it the right way are having a tough time with the ROI. Yeah. Because it's very easy to do that sales and marketing ROI. It's, you told me if you gave me 250,000 pounds, you would get me 20,000 new customers. Did you or did you not do that? Based on that answer, I know that if I can or cannot trust you in the future with that amount of money.
Yeah.
That's pretty easy. But, and then on the operational side, it's also easy. It's, did we send these invoices? Did they get paid? Great. But then you get into that reality about the different teams measuring things differently. The sales and marketing team says, wow, you gave me 200,000 pounds and I got 10,000 new customers. That was great. If I gave you 250, could you give me 15,000?
Yeah.
And now you're inundating the call center. Or now you may have created something that the other team didn't understand how to match. So if you're doing the ROI, that person might have said in sales and marketing with that budget might have said, this was the best ROI project ever. I hit my targets. We got a giant bonuses. We're going to have some champagne. But then on the operations side is you just gave me 20,000 new customers to onboard with these complex contracts, and we didn't have time to execute that. So if you look at it from a project perspective, success may just be an early indicator of failure. But if you look at it from a systems perspective, you have to say, let's follow this customer spend. So we spent this much in sales and marketing to acquire them, but then they left at the renewal time. Let's focus on that customer experience that made them leave during renewal time.
Yeah. You want to keep them on, don't you?
Yeah.
Retaining them, isn't it?
Yeah. And it's not just in that 11th month that you have to worry about that renewal. It's in the middle. I mean, are you sending a birthday message? Are you sending a message? We had a lot of car insurers here in the United States that initially started advertising, we're going to drop your car insurance rates, because everybody was just sitting at home, not driving their car. And they were sitting at home, not driving their car, watching television. And in the United States, I would guess fully half of all television is insurance company ads. So you're sitting home, you have free time, and every other commercial, somebody's telling you that you're getting ripped off on insurance. So one of the things that they did here is they said, you know what, the actuarial tables needed to be updated because fewer people are driving. Let's just save everybody a little bit of money. Say, hey, for a while, we're going to cut your rates. So that was new communications and a chance to positively engage.
Wow.
So that's a customer lifetime and customer life cycle really means you have to do a customer ROI each year.
From a tactical point of view, we know what they're looking for and how they're handling it. I read a great article you wrote for Document Media, and it's about sort of 6 ways to track ROI for your current CCM systems over time. And that's some great stuff. And I recommend anyone listening to find some of Scott's stuff that he has. And he writes a lot for Document Media and some leading CX featured websites and press. So from your end, is there any good sort of takeaways that people can look at, some good tactics they can look at when it comes to tracking ROI from CCM systems?
Yeah, that's one of the things that's important is you have to understand how much that customer costs. You have to follow that cost with the customer. And ROI is about customer cost and aggregate spending, but not at the project level. It follows the customer.
Yeah.
So are you creating like that nightmare sales and marketing scenario that's successful, but then damages the IT system or washes up creating, 5, 10, 20 pound call center interactions? So you have to understand, like, is this communication just this cost? Is it the paper? Is it the design, the paper, and the stamp? Or is it the design, the paper, and the stamp, and then a 10% chance at a 5 pound call center interaction? And then some of the other ones is, are you kind of updating things? Are you keeping the communication designs fresh? Some of the things like over here, like there was one that says set it and forget it. A lot of times people say, oh, CCM redesign, we're going to redesign our comms project for statements. Great. And then they do that, and then 10 years go by. So they're not updating it. They're not updating the technology because they didn't do a refresh, or they didn't want to buy an upgrade. So the technology was sitting stagnant and the content sits stagnant. Before you know it, 10 years goes by and you have a terribly designed bill.
Yeah.
Some of the other ones are, if you're measuring ROI, you want to understand like what your real costs are, because the I is important, and I don't think the I is absolutely tracked, because there are budget items that just are assumed to go forward.
Mm-hmm.
But the cost of integrating multiple systems is a huge burden on your IT team. And it's a huge burden that doesn't really show up as in a way that's attributable to the project. So one of the things that we look at, and personally, I've been working with my boss, Chris Hardigan, on helping our customers attribute revenue to their projects. because a lot of them are just kind of cost projects.
Yeah.
In a statement, one of the things that let's say Paragon does is statements for you. At the end of the month, when you settle up, there's an interesting report you're going to get from Paragon. You're going to get a bill, which is good because it's a way for you to measure that. So you can take that information, those production statistics, so that the Paragon will, somebody like you would track that they may not track. And then you can say, we sent out 1.3 million statements, but they generated 48 million pounds in revenue this month. A lot of times operational communications only get looked at from a cost perspective and not a returns. Working with like a partner who's going to help you boost that design value, you're going to focus on the revenue and the cost instead of just the cost. If you keep it in your IT dungeon, it's, remember those people are locked in there. It's don't let them out because they ask for money every time.
I've got a great image of these people stuck in there. It's just
they're nice people, I was one of these people for a number of years, and I was always saying, hey, look, if you could just help us with this little bit, or I need this upgrade, then we can do this for the customers. And they're like, no, it's fine. It costs money. It's like
yeah.
You'll hear horrifying things. Like in my career, I've heard horrifying things. And that kind of shaped us into this customer experience mindset. Like very early in my career, I would hear things like, it doesn't matter, they're still going to pay the bill. That stuff might have worked 10 years ago, 15 years ago. It doesn't work now. No. They can switch. Somebody else probably built a mobile app that makes them, switch automatically. Yeah, you have to play defense. You used to not have to play defense. It was, you know what? These people, they're just going to pay the bill. I'm going to make a bill or a statement as cheaply as possible, and they're going to pay it. And if they don't, we have a customer win back program that says, oh, we'll give you a half off next month's bill to come back.
Yeah.
It doesn't work
back up again. Yeah.
It's like, wait a second. You were mean for me for 10 months. I told you I was canceling. You're going to be nice to me for 1 month and then mean for me for another 11?
It's a dysfunctional relationship, isn't it?
Yeah. And that's, you might not think you're doing that, but you are doing that to customers in a lot of departments, especially if you think about things in terms of projects and you're only looking at cost management, not customer experience return on investment.
So another return of tracking is the return on maintenance idea. And I read a blog you did for Cordian, quite a while ago now, and it has some really interesting pointers in there around the tracking of your maintenance charges. Do you want to finish this off and just sort of give us an overview of what that is?
Yeah, return on maintenance is something that goes to that cost item that's just assumed every year. A lot of people are lazy, I'm lazy sometimes. And if somebody says, hey, make the 2021, well, let's not do this for 2020 and 2021 because those are a little bit weird years. But let's say it's 2017 and somebody says, well, it's time for the 2018 budget. Well, you open up that Excel file, you change the name to 2018, and you just add a few percentage points, tweak it a little bit, and you have something fairly serviceable.
Yeah.
But one of those items that's buried under there, and everybody listening to this podcast has multiple line items that are maintenance for customer communications management systems or maintenance for the systems that support this, or annual expenses for maintaining custom integrations between systems that are not integrated from the manufacturer. So what you want to do is understand what you're getting for that. Because a lot of times we have what we say, set it and forget it, design once and leave it alone type of communications. But those maintenance expenses generally go up 5 to 10% per year. So if you wait 5 years, you have an incredible amount of maintenance you're paying, but you're not getting any return. Now, all of these vendors presumably are doing, updates, whether it's, every month in some cases, every 2 years in others. You got to hold your vendors to task, because if they're going to charge you more, you need to make sure you're getting more. And not just in terms of it's available, you have to be using it. So make sure that as you look and design your portfolio, you have the greatest capabilities you can. and you're using a vendor with great capabilities, and make sure that the capabilities constantly improve. And that's like over in software, we spend a lot of time, like over at Quadient, we put 3-person centuries a year of development into our core product line.
Yeah.
So we want to make sure that people are using those features and capabilities. And I know, Paragon customers have access to these. So that means you can design better, you can design faster, you can collaborate better with your colleagues at your own company, as well as your account team over at Paragon, to make sure you're making the fewest number of changes for the maximum impact to support a customer experience with the minimal amount of effort on your part.
Well, that's great, Scott. So I think we should finish this here, and I think thank you so much for this input. And it was a really insightful discussion around this, understanding the key drivers, the customer's journey, and sort of some of these key takeaways that business can look at from an ROI perspective. So I want to say thank you very much for joining me, Scott. It's been an absolute pleasure. But if anyone wants to know any more information from what we discussed today on this podcast, everything will be available on the podcast page. And thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time on the next episode of Paragon Sounds podcast.
For all the information covered in today's episode, please visit www.paragon-cc.com/Paragon Sounds.